My wife spent 3 years calling my workshop a dead end. That morning, she asked 12 people in a glass-walled boardroom to pay $600 million for it. Claire Reed stood at the far end of the conference table with a remote in one hand and the largest deal of her career glowing on the screen behind her. Northline Systems, Strategic Acquisition. The words were printed in clean white letters over a photograph of polished steel components, the kind of image corporate people used when they wanted machinery to look expensive without showing the hands that built it. I sat alone in the reception area outside, close enough to hear her voice through the doors. Calm, confident, precise. It was the same voice she used when she wanted a room to believe she had already won. Northline owns 14 critical patents, she said. Their magnetic bearing platform reduces thermal loss by nearly 30%, extends turbine service life, and could protect Halcyon from more than $2 billion in delayed contracts. A man near the center of the table leaned back in his chair. Victor Langford, Halcyon Dynamics Chief Executive Officer, wore a Navy suit that probably cost more than the first milling machine I ever bought. And the price? He asked. Claire clicked the remote. The number appeared behind her. $600 million. Nobody laughed. Nobody checked a phone. 12 executives stared at the screen like it was a lifeboat, and their company had already started taking on water. Claire let the silence work for her. She had always understood silence in a boardroom. At home, she treated it like an empty space that needed to be filled with disappointment. $600 million gives us the patents, the control software, the testing data, and full ownership of the production facility outside Pittsburgh, she continued. It is aggressive, but without Northline, our turbine division may not survive the next fiscal year. I looked down at my hands. The grease had been scrubbed from beneath my nails, but the skin still carried the fine cracks that came from 20 years around steel, cutting fluid, and winter air. Claire used to hold those hands across a diner table and tell me they looked honest. Lately, she looked at them as if they were evidence that I had refused to become someone better. Olivia Grant, the chairwoman of Halcyon's board, studied the final page in front of her. You are certain the owner will sell? Claire smiled. It was a small smile, polished and careful. Everyone has a number. Victor gave a quiet chuckle. Especially small shop owners. They spend their lives confusing pride with leverage. A few people around the table smiled with him. I had heard that kind of laughter before. 11 days earlier, Claire had used nearly the same tone at a company dinner when she told Victor my workshop was a dead-end business. She had said it while I was sitting beside her. She had not whispered it. She had not looked embarrassed afterward. She had laughed. That was the part one remembered, not the insult. Her laughter. Inside the boardroom, Claire advanced to the final slide. Legal has completed the ownership review through Northline's registered representatives. The founder has avoided public attention, but the documentation is clean. We are prepared to execute a letter of intent today. Olivia placed both hands on the table. Then I want the founder in this room before we vote. For the first time, Claire's rhythm broke. It lasted less than a second, but I knew her well enough to see it. His counsel indicated that he prefers privacy. He is asking us for $600 million, Olivia replied. Privacy is no longer the priority. Victor tapped his pen against the folder. Bring him in. The general counsel turned toward the glass doors. Through the narrow opening, his eyes found mine. He gave one short nod. I stood, buttoned the charcoal jacket Ben Carter had insisted I buy, and picked up the old brass key resting beside me. It was the key to the workshop's original front door, cut by my father in 1989, long before Northline had patents, lawyers, or a value large enough to make people sit straighter. The conference doors opened. Conversation stopped. Claire looked up, expecting a stranger. Instead, she saw her husband walking toward the table. Her expression did not collapse all at once. First came confusion, then recognition, then the slow realization that every person in the room had turned to watch me. Mason, she said. My name sounded out of place in her mouth, too personal for a room built around numbers. Victor frowned. What is he doing here? The attorney stepped beside me and set a thick black folder on the table. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Mason Reed, founder, chief engineer, and sole controlling member of Northline Systems. The room went still. Claire looked at the acquisition price behind her, then at the key in my hand, then back at me. I did not smile. I did not need to. Before we discuss whether I will sell my company, I said, I think my wife should explain why she called it a dead end. 11 days earlier, I had walked into a ballroom believing Claire was merely ashamed of my work. I had no idea she was about to lead her company directly to my door. 11 days earlier, I walked into the Halcyon Dynamics annual leadership dinner wearing a jacket Claire had chosen because she said my usual clothes made me look like I had come straight from the shop. She was right about one thing. I had. Less than 2 hours earlier, I had been standing beside a 5-axis milling machine, watching a titanium rotor housing emerge within 2/10,000ths of an inch of tolerance. Now I was beneath crystal chandeliers at the Grand Meridian Hotel in downtown Pittsburgh, surrounded by polished shoes, expensive watches, and people who spoke about manufacturing as if metal shaped itself after a conference call. Claire looked completely at home. Her dark blue dress matched the Halcyon colors, and the silver pin on her shoulder marked her as a senior vice president. She moved from conversation to conversation with a hand on an elbow, a bright smile, and the effortless confidence that had carried her from a junior analyst position to the executive floor. I stood beside her holding a glass of sparkling water, listening to men discuss factories they had never entered. Victor Langford joined us near the center of the ballroom. He was taller than I expected, with silver hair, a careful smile, and the relaxed posture of a man who assumed every room belonged to him. Claire straightened when she saw him. That small movement told me more than her words ever could. "Victor, this is my husband, Mason," she said. He shook my hand without looking at it. "Claire tells me you work with machines." "I build precision systems," I replied. His attention drifted toward someone behind me. "Automotive repair?" Before I could answer, Claire laughed softly. "Nothing that glamorous. Mason has an old workshop outside the city. Custom parts, specialty repairs, small production runs." She tilted her head toward me with a smile that looked affectionate from a distance. "He has been trying to make it into a real business for years." Victor finally looked directly at me. "Trying. It keeps him busy," Claire said. "But honestly, it is a dead-end business. He just refuses to admit it." The people around us laughed. Not cruelly. That would have been easier. They laughed casually, the way people laugh when the outcome seems obvious and the person being discussed is not important enough to object. I watched Claire. She laughed too. Her hand remained looped through my arm, but it felt less like affection and more like she was keeping an inconvenient detail in place. I did not correct her. I did not mention the 38 employees who depended on that workshop. I did not mention the 14 patents, the private testing contracts, or the engineers from 3 states who had signed non-disclosure agreements before they were allowed past the second steel door. I simply said, "Sometimes small places build important things." Victor smiled as if I had offered him a pleasant slogan. Every small business owner believes that. A waiter passed with glasses of champagne. Victor took one and raised it slightly toward Claire. "Your wife understands scale. That is why she is leading the most important acquisition Halcyon has attempted in a decade." Claire's face brightened. "We have not announced it yet." "Then consider this a private compliment," he said. A presentation screen near the stage changed slides. For less than 3 seconds, before the event logo returned, I saw a photograph of a polished bearing assembly mounted inside a turbine housing. My bearing assembly. The image had been taken during a controlled test at our secondary facility 6 months earlier. In the lower corner, almost hidden beneath Halcyon's blue design template, were 2 words: Northline Systems. I felt the base of my glass press against my palm. Claire was still talking about expected growth, regulatory clearance, and the possibility of entering new energy markets. Her voice faded beneath the quiet turning of facts inside my head. Halcyon knew Northline existed. Claire was helping them pursue it. And she had no idea that the man standing beside her owned every controlling share. Victor glanced toward the screen. "If this deal closes, Claire will have earned her place at the top table." Claire smiled at him with a warmth I had not seen directed at me in months. "It will close. The founder may be difficult," Victor said. "People who build companies from nothing tend to confuse sentiment with value." "Then we show him the number," Claire replied. "Everyone becomes practical when enough money is placed in front of them." I looked at her profile beneath the ballroom lights and remembered a younger Claire sitting on an overturned bucket in my father's workshop, eating takeout noodles while I repaired an electrical panel. Back then, she had said the place smelled like possibility. Now she spoke about its owner as if he were an obstacle on a spreadsheet. A bell chimed, calling everyone toward dinner. Claire squeezed my arm. Please try to enjoy yourself tonight, she whispered. And do not start talking about the workshop. These people will not understand. I looked once more at the blank screen. I think they understand more than you realize, I said. She gave me a distracted smile and followed Victor toward the head table. I stayed where I was for another moment, surrounded by conversation and soft music, with one certainty settling into place. Halcyon Dynamics was not preparing to buy a company from some unknown inventor. It was preparing to walk through my front door. Claire barely spoke to me during the drive home. Pittsburgh slid past the windows in ribbons of amber streetlight, steel bridges rising over the dark water while the heater pushed dry air. Through the dashboard, she answered 3 emails before we reached the interstate, each tap of her phone precise and impatient. I kept both hands on the wheel of my 12-year-old Ford pickup and listened to the quiet between us. It had not always been that way. There had been a time when Claire would ride beside me with her shoes kicked off, reading contract language aloud while I drove home from the shop. She used to ask questions about every machine I bought. She knew the difference between a lathe and a mill before most of her co-workers knew the difference between revenue and profit. Somewhere along the way, curiosity became tolerance. Then tolerance became embarrassment. You could have made more of an effort tonight, she finally said. I wore the jacket you picked. That is not what I mean. She locked her phone and looked through the windshield. You stood there like you were judging everyone. I was listening. Mason, those people run international divisions. They manage budgets larger than some cities. When Victor asks what you do, you cannot answer like you are testing him. I glanced at her. I said I build precision systems. You own a workshop. Her words landed softly, almost politely. That made them heavier. There is nothing wrong with honest work, she continued. But you speak as though that place is something bigger than it is. I watched the white lines pass beneath the headlights. How big does something have to be before you respect it? She sighed and turned toward the passenger window. That is not fair. It was the phrase she used whenever a question reached a place she did not want examined. By the time we pulled into our driveway in Fox Chapel, the porch lights were glowing over a house we had chosen together 9 years earlier. Claire had wanted clean stone, tall windows, and enough space to host clients. I had wanted a garage deep enough for a workbench. We had both gotten what we asked for. Somehow, neither of us had gotten what we expected. Inside, she set her purse on the marble counter and removed the silver pin from her dress. I hung my jacket over a chair. The kitchen was spotless, arranged more like a photograph than a room where 2 people lived. Victor thinks I could move into corporate strategy after this acquisition, she said. There it was. The real conversation. Is that what you want? It is what I have worked toward for 15 years. Then I hope you get it. She studied me as if support from me had become suspicious. You do not sound excited. I am tired. That was true, just not complete. I had been awake since 4:30 that morning. Before the dinner, I had spent 10 hours reviewing thermal stress data with Ben Carter, adjusting a rotor assembly that weighed nearly 800 pounds and could not be wrong by more than the width of a human hair. Claire believed my days were filled with small repair orders and old equipment. I had allowed her to believe it longer than I should have. At first, privacy had protected the company. Later, silence had protected the marriage from a question I was afraid to answer. Would she look at me differently if she knew what I owned? By then, I already knew the more painful answer. She looked at me differently because she believed I owned nothing worth admiring. You should sell the shop, she said. We have discussed this. You have discussed it. I have listened. That building takes everything from you. Your mornings, your weekends, your attention. It paid for this house. My salary pays for this house. I looked around at the stone counters, the imported light fixtures, and the refrigerator covered with no photographs because Claire said magnets made it look cluttered. Your salary pays the monthly expenses, I said. The down payment came from me. She folded her arms. From an old family property. From my business. Her expression changed, but only slightly. Then that should prove my point. You had one good year, and you have spent the next decade chasing it. I could have corrected her. I could have opened the secure folder on my phone and shown her licensing revenue, patent valuations, and contracts carrying more zeros than her entire division had earned last quarter. Instead, I looked at the woman who once brought sandwiches to my father's workshop and wondered when success had become something that only counted if her colleagues could see it. I am not selling, I said. Claire picked up her purse. Then do not blame me when people stop pretending it has a future. She walked upstairs, leaving the kitchen lights on behind her. I remained beside the counter until the house settled into silence. Then my phone vibrated. The message came from our corporate attorney. Halcyon Dynamics has requested a private review of Northline's ownership structure. They want a meeting within 10 days. I read it twice. Upstairs, Claire crossed the hallway without looking down. She thought our lives occupied two different worlds. She did not know her world had just submitted a formal request to enter mine. The next morning, I reached Reed Precision Works before sunrise, while the streets outside Pittsburgh were still dark and the frost had turned every parked car silver. The workshop looked exactly the way Claire remembered it: faded brick, narrow windows, a dented loading door, and my father's hand-painted sign hanging above the entrance. From the road, it seemed too small to matter. That was intentional. I unlocked the front door with the old brass key and stepped into the familiar smell of steel, cutting fluid, and coffee that had been sitting too long on a burner. The first room held the machines Claire had seen years earlier. 2 manual lathes, a worn drill press, shelves of ordinary replacement parts. Small jobs moved through that space every week, enough to make the business appear modest and predictable. But the visible workshop was only the first layer. I crossed the production floor, past the tool cabinets, and stopped at a solid steel door without a sign. A camera above it recognized my face. The lock released with a quiet click. Beyond that door was the company Claire had never bothered to understand. White overhead lights illuminated a clean manufacturing floor nearly 3 times the size of the original shop. Computer-controlled mills stood in 2 precise rows, their enclosed cutting chambers glowing through thick safety glass. Engineers studied live data across wall-mounted screens. A robotic inspection arm moved over a turbine component, measuring surfaces too. Tolerances smaller than a strand of hair. At the center of the room, behind a clear protective barrier, rested the machine Halcyon Dynamics needed more than anyone outside that building realized. Ben Carter stood beside it with a paper cup in one hand and a tablet in the other. He had been my friend since community college and my first employee when the workshop could barely cover its electric bill. His beard had gone mostly gray, but he still wore the same faded work shirts and spoke to expensive machinery like it was a stubborn pickup truck. "You look like you slept in the driveway," he said. "Close enough." I handed him my phone. He read the message from our attorney, then looked through the glass at the magnetic bearing assembly. "So they finally found us." "They found Northline," I said. "They still do not know who owns it." Ben returned the phone. "Does Claire know?" "No." He watched me for a moment, careful not to say what both of us were thinking. Claire had visited the original workshop dozens of times during the early years, but she had never crossed that steel door. When Northline began working under federal confidentiality rules and private industrial contracts, I explained that the research area was restricted. She accepted that answer because, by then, she had stopped asking what happened inside. Ben walked with me toward the test station. The bearing assembly appeared simple from a distance, a polished steel ring surrounding a dark central shaft. It had taken 7 years for failed prototypes and nearly every dollar we could safely reinvest. Traditional industrial bearings depended on physical contact. Friction created heat. Heat created wear. Wear created shutdowns that cost energy companies millions of dollars. Our system suspended the turbine shaft inside a controlled magnetic field, reducing contact, lowering operating temperature, and allowing the machinery to run longer with less energy. The metal was not the most valuable part. The real advantage lived inside thousands of lines of control software, adjusting the magnetic field faster than a person could blink. Test cycle finished at 4:12 this morning, Ben said. 28.7% lower thermal loss. Vibration stayed below the target through the full load range. I studied the numbers on his tablet. Run it again. We have already run it 6 times. Then 7 will make me comfortable. Ben smiled. Your father would have liked that answer. My eyes moved toward the small brass plate mounted on the base of the test unit. Walter 1. My father never saw the final system operate, but every machine in that room carried something he had taught me. Measure twice. Listen before you adjust. Never trust a clean report until the metal agrees with it. To Claire, the workshop represented everything I had failed to outgrow. To the 38 people arriving through the employee entrance, it represented mortgages, college tuition, health insurance, and work they were proud to explain to their children. To Halcyon, it represented a way out of a problem their executives had hidden from shareholders for nearly a year. My attorney called as the test chamber sealed. Halcyon wants access to the patent portfolio and production records before making a formal offer, he said. They are pushing for an accelerated review. Give them the public filings and nothing from this room. There is another issue. Their acquisition team may already have an internal photograph of the prototype. I looked through the glass at the polished assembly as the system powered on. How would they have that? We are trying to determine the source. The low hum of the magnetic field filled the room. Ben saw the change in my face. I ended the call and searched my memory. Then I remembered Claire standing inside the workshop 6 months earlier, holding up her phone while I spoke with the technician behind her. She had said she was taking a picture of the old sign for a presentation about failing family businesses. I had believed the camera was pointed toward the door. It had been pointed past me. For the rest of that morning, the memory of Claire holding up her phone followed me through the workshop like a reflection I could not step away from. I returned to my office, closed the door, and opened the secure archive on my computer. Every visitor who entered read. Precision Works signed a digital log. Every camera recorded the public floor. 6 months earlier, Claire had arrived at 11:14 in the morning and stayed for 23 minutes. I found the footage. She wore a cream coat and carried the leather tote Victor had given her after her promotion. She paused beneath my father's sign, took several pictures, then walked farther inside while I spoke with one of our technicians. Her phone shifted slightly. For less than 2 seconds, the lens pointed through the open steel door. The image would have captured the edge of the prototype, the monitoring screens, and the brass plate marked Walter 1. Claire had not entered the restricted area. She had not stolen a document. She had simply taken a photograph without caring what stood behind me. That carelessness hurt in a way anger could not reach. I closed the video and stared at the framed picture on my desk. It showed Claire and me at the workshop 16 years earlier, before the clean research floor, before Northline, before either of us knew what our ambitions would cost. The building had belonged to my father then. Walter Reed could repair almost anything with a motor, but he never made much money doing it. He charged neighbors less than he should, extended credit longer than he could afford, and kept a coffee can beneath the front counter for families who needed parts but could not pay. When he died, the workshop came to me with $78,000 in debt, a leaking roof, and 3 machines older than I was. Claire was 24. I was 27. Everyone told me to sell the property. Claire did not. She brought me dinner after work, helped paint the office, and spent Saturday mornings answering the phone while I rebuilt equipment. Some nights, we slept on separate couches in the break room because neither of us had the energy to drive home. Back then, she called the place our beginning. I remembered one winter when the furnace failed and the temperature inside dropped below 40 degrees. We wore coats while working and warmed our hands around paper cups. Claire sat on an overturned bucket beside a stack of invoices and told me that one day, the old shop would be worth every difficult morning. I believed her because she believed me. The first breakthrough came 5 years later, after a paper mill hired us to solve a vibration problem no larger manufacturer wanted to touch. I designed a modified bearing housing, and Ben machined the first version overnight. It did not make us rich, but it kept the mill running and gave us a reputation for solving problems other people had already abandoned. One contract became 4. 4 became 12. We paid off the debt, replaced the roof, and hired our first employees. When I formed Northline Systems, I used a separate legal structure to protect the patents and the workers. Reed Precision Works owned the building and equipment. Northline owned the designs, software, and licensing rights. A family trust held the land. No single acquisition could erase everything my father had built. Claire knew that I had created another company, but she believed it was only paperwork for taxes and liability. I never corrected her. At first, confidentiality agreements made silence necessary. Later, silence became easier than explaining why nearly every dollar stayed inside the business. We lived well, but not extravagantly. I drove the same truck. I wore the same boots. I never moved my office from the corner room with the uneven floor. Claire saw no visible transformation, so she decided none had occurred. That was my mistake. I thought humility would protect us from money. Instead, secrecy allowed contempt to grow in the empty space where truth should have been. Ben knocked once and entered. The repeat test passed, he said. Better than the last run. I turned the photograph of Claire and me face down. I need you to review every access record from the past year. He understood immediately. You think the picture came from her? I think she took it. I do not know where it went after that. Does that change the meeting? I looked through the office window at the workers moving between machines, each one unaware that a corporation was preparing to place a price on their future. No, I said. It changes what I need to know before I enter the room. My phone vibrated again. This time the message came from Claire. Halcyon is sending a preliminary team to inspect a possible acquisition target next week. Victor asked me to lead the visit. I may be working late. I read the words slowly. She was coming back to the workshop, not as my wife, but as the woman preparing to dismantle it. Claire came home after 9 that evening carrying a white takeout bag and the kind of energy she usually reserved for promotions. I was at the kitchen table reviewing production schedules on a tablet, but I locked the screen before she could see the Northline logo in the corner. She set the food between us, poured herself a glass of water, and began talking before she removed her coat. The acquisition moved faster than expected, she said. Victor wants the preliminary inspection completed before the board meeting. I opened one of the containers. Grilled chicken, rice, vegetables. The meal was warm. Her voice was warmer. For the first time in months, she seemed eager to tell me about her day. She described Northline as a small engineering company with unusually valuable intellectual property. She said its founder had avoided interviews, industry conferences, and public financing. Halcyon's research team had found almost no personal information about him. He sounds careful, I said. Claire smiled. He sounds difficult. Probably one of those inventors who thinks understanding a machine means he understands business. I moved a piece of chicken across the container without eating it. Maybe he values privacy. Privacy is useful until someone offers you enough money. She sat across from me and opened her laptop. A chart filled the screen before she turned it slightly away, more from habit than concern. Northline has something Halcyon cannot develop quickly enough on its own. If we buy the company now, we can integrate the technology before the next contract cycle. And what happens to Northline afterward? That depends on what is worth keeping. She said it lightly, as if discussing furniture in an old house. The patents stay. The control software stays. The strongest engineers receive retention packages. Everything else gets reviewed, including the workshop, especially the workshop. The fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Why? It is inefficient. Old building. Limited access roads. Too much space devoted to small production work. Halcyon can move the important equipment to its main facility in Ohio and reduce overhead. I thought of Ben arriving before sunrise. I thought of Maria Alvarez, who ran quality control and had 2 daughters in college. I thought of Daniel Price, who had turned down a larger company because we promised he would never be treated like a number on a staffing report. Claire saw rooms and machines. I saw people who had carried Northline through every failed test and every month when payroll mattered more than profit. How many employees would lose their jobs? I asked. It is too early to know. That means someone already estimated it. Her expression tightened. Mason, this is how acquisitions work. You cannot preserve every position just because people have been there a long time. How many? She closed the laptop halfway. Possibly 25. Maybe 30. 30 out of 38. She reached for her water. The owner will be compensated generously. He can take care of the people he feels responsible for. After Halcyon removes their jobs. After Halcyon pays for assets it can use more efficiently. The language was clean. That was what made it cold. No one was being discarded. Positions were being consolidated. No community was losing a business. Overhead was being reduced. Corporate language could make almost anything disappear without admitting it had ever been alive. What if the owner refuses? I asked. Claire leaned back. Then Victor applies pressure. What kind? Suppliers. Distribution. Certification partners. Halcyon has relationships Northline depends on. A small company cannot stay independent forever when a larger company decides it needs what they have. I looked at her across the kitchen table and understood something I had missed during the dinner. Claire was not merely participating in the acquisition. She believed in the method. She believed size created the right to decide what survived. You sound certain he will sell? I said. People like him. Always do. They resist because resistance makes them feel important. Then the final number arrives. She smiled and opened the laptop again. Victor thinks $600 million will end the conversation. And if the company is worth more, then the owner should have learned how to negotiate before attracting our attention. Her phone vibrated. She read the message and stood. I need to prepare for the inspection. We are visiting the production site Monday morning. Where is it? I asked, although I already knew. An old industrial property near Braddock. She gathered the containers and carried them toward the trash. You would probably like it. From the photographs, it looks a lot like your place. I remained at the table after she went upstairs. The room felt larger without her voice and smaller with everything she had said. My phone rested beside the unopened production schedule. I sent one message to our attorney. Approve the inspection. Give them access to the public floor only. Then I sent another to Ben. Halcyon is coming Monday. Do not tell the staff who Claire is. A minute later, he replied. Does she know who you are? I looked toward the staircase. Not yet, I wrote. By Monday morning, my wife would walk into the building she wanted closed, carrying a plan to remove almost everyone inside it. And I would be waiting near the front door. Sunday afternoon, less than 24 hours before the inspection, our attorney sent me a secure folder containing the materials Halcyon Dynamics had used to justify its interest in Northline. Most of it came from public patent records, supplier filings, and industry reports. Then I opened a presentation marked internal research and saw my own workshop on the first page. The photograph had been cropped to remove Claire's reflection from the glass, but I recognized the angle immediately. My father's sign appeared on the left. I stood near the center with my back turned. Beyond my shoulder, visible through the open steel door, was the edge of Walter 1. Someone had enlarged that section, sharpened the image, and placed a red circle around the magnetic bearing assembly. Beneath it, a note read, possible. Connection between Reed Precision Works and Northline Systems. My wife had not merely photographed the workshop. She had sent the picture into a company that now intended to close it. I kept reading. The presentation included 3 more images from the same visit. One showed a delivery crate with a supplier code. Another captured a monitor displaying partial test data. The last showed Ben walking through the restricted area behind me. Halcyon's research team had followed every detail. The supplier code led them to a specialty magnet manufacturer in Ohio. Shipping records led them to Northline. Patent registrations led them to the control software. Claire's photograph had given Victor the first thread, and his people had pulled until my private company appeared at the other end. I called our attorney. Where did Halcyon get these? I asked. The metadata lists Claire Reed as the original sender. His answer was careful. The file was attached to an internal message 6 months ago. Who received it? Victor Langford. I looked through the office window at the quiet production floor. Only the overnight maintenance lights were on. The machines stood motionless, clean and patient, as if they were waiting for Monday with the rest of us. What did the message say? There was a pause. I think you should read it yourself. He forwarded the original email. Claire had written only 4 sentences. Victor, you asked for an example of a small legacy manufacturer that has failed to modernize. This is my husband's workshop. He insists there is value in keeping it open, but the operation is outdated and emotionally managed. The attached photographs may help with your presentation on inefficient private businesses. I read the message twice, then a third time. She had not known what the images contained. She had not intentionally revealed Northline, but she had offered my life's work as an example of failure. That truth carried its own weight. I remembered the day she took the pictures. She had arrived without calling and said she needed authentic images for a leadership presentation. I thought she wanted to show how small manufacturers supported local communities. I even moved a stack of crates so she could get a clearer view of my father's sign. She smiled, thanked me, and left before lunch. That afternoon, I had felt proud that something from my world might finally enter hers. It had, just not in the way I imagined. Ben arrived a few minutes later carrying 2 cups of coffee. He saw the email on my screen and set both cups down. She sent it, he said. Yes. Did she know about the prototype? No, does that make it better? I looked at the red circle around Walter 1. It makes it different. Not better. Ben pulled out the chair across from me. For a while, neither of us spoke. We had spent years protecting the company from competitors, market pressure, and careless partners. I had never considered that the opening would come through someone sitting at my own dinner table. What are you going to do tomorrow? He asked. Let them inspect the public floor. And Claire? I need to hear what she says when she believes the owner is not listening. Monday morning arrived cold and clear. At 8:45, 3 black sport utility vehicles turned into the workshop parking lot. Victor stepped out first, followed by Claire and 6 members of Halcyon's acquisition team. She wore a gray suit and carried a leather folder against her chest. From behind the reception window, I watched her glance at my father's sign without recognition, as if she had already separated this building from the man she lived with. Victor looked around the property and frowned. "This is smaller than I expected," he said. Claire checked the address on her phone. The legal records confirm it. Then she saw my truck near the loading door. Her steps slowed. I walked out from the production floor wearing my usual work shirt, safety glasses resting above my forehead. Confusion crossed her face before she arranged it into a professional smile. "Mason, what are you doing here?" she asked. I looked at the folder in her hands, then at Victor standing beside her. "I work here," I said. She gave a brief, nervous laugh. "Of course. I forgot your shop was in this area." Victor barely looked at me. "Good. Then you can find whoever manages the facility." Before I could answer, Claire touched his arm and guided him toward reception. "Mason handles some of the daily operations," she said. "He can probably show us around until the actual decision-maker arrives." I opened the door for them. She walked past me without knowing that the decision-maker already had. The first thing Victor Langford did inside my workshop was wipe one finger across the reception counter and inspect it as if dust could explain the value of everything around him. The surface was clean. His expression suggested he was disappointed. Claire stood beside him with her folder open, already speaking in the measured tone she used when she wanted to control a room. "The public production area occupies roughly 18,000 square feet, she said. "The property includes the original structure, 2 additions, and rear loading access." She knew the numbers because they were printed in Halcyon's report. She did not know that I had approved every addition, signed every loan, and spent hundreds of nights planning where each machine would stand. Victor glanced at me. "Show us the floor." He did not ask my name again. To him, I was part of the building, another practical object that could explain where the electrical panels were located. I handed each visitor safety glasses and led them past the manual lathes. The morning shift continued working. No one stared. Ben had warned the team that potential business partners were visiting, and our people understood discretion better than most executives understood loyalty. Maria Alvarez stood at the inspection station, checking a machine housing beneath white light. Victor paused behind her. "How old is that equipment?" he asked. 7 years, I said. "It looks older." "It is maintained. Maintenance keeps old equipment alive. It does not make it competitive." Maria kept her eyes on the measurement screen. She had worked with me for 12 years and knew exactly how much that station cost. She also knew Victor had mistaken a custom enclosure for outdated machinery. I saw the corner of her mouth tighten, but she said nothing. Claire wrote a note. "The Ohio facility has newer inspection systems," she told him. "Most quality. Functions could be transferred." Victor nodded. "Good. That reduces the need to retain local staff." The words moved through the workshop without changing volume, but several employees heard them. A machinist near the loading area lowered his eyes. Another worker continued arranging tools more carefully than necessary. Claire noticed. For half a second, discomfort crossed her face. Then she returned to her folder. She had estimated their jobs from a kitchen table. Hearing the decision beside the people affected was different. Not different enough. We reached the steel door leading to Northline's research floor. A red access light glowed beside the frame. Victor stopped. "Open it." "That area is restricted." His eyebrows rose. "We are here to evaluate the company. You are here for a preliminary inspection of the public facility." Claire stepped closer to me and lowered her voice. "Mason, please do not make this difficult. I am following the access terms your legal department accepted." She looked surprised that I knew the terms. Victor examined the camera above the door. "What is behind it?" "Private development work." For Northline, I held his gaze. "That information belongs in your meeting with the owner." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "You have been practicing that answer." "I have had experience protecting things people want." Ben appeared from the shipping corridor carrying a tablet. Victor turned toward him. "Are you the facility manager?" "Operations manager," Ben replied. "Then perhaps you can explain why your employee is obstructing our review." Ben looked at me, then back at Victor. "Mason has final authority over access." Claire gave a small laugh that arrived too quickly. He means daily authority. My husband has been here a long time, so everyone treats him like the person in charge. She said husband quietly, as if the word complicated the professional image she was trying to maintain. Victor studied me with renewed interest, though not respect. Your wife did mention you had an attachment to this place. Attachment is one word for it. He walked toward the conference room overlooking the production floor. We followed. Inside, Halcyon's team spread financial summaries across the table. Their numbers covered labor, utility costs, property value, and relocation estimates. They had assigned a price to nearly everything they could see. Victor tapped the staffing page. After closing, we would retain 8 technical employees for transition. The rest received standard separation packages. Ben stood near the window. His face remained calm, but I saw his hand close around the tablet. You have not reviewed their work, I said. I do not need to review every person, Victor replied. Redundant labor is redundant labor. Claire remained silent. That silence answered a question I had carried into the room. Victor turned another page. As for you, Reed, there may be a temporary role available. 6 months as a site advisor. You would help catalog equipment and support the move to Ohio. And after 6 months, you receive a completion payment and move on. From the workshop? From whatever you believe this workshop represents. He leaned back. A successful acquisition requires separating useful assets from emotional baggage. I looked at Claire. She avoided my eyes. Have you met Northline's owner? I asked. Victor smiled. Not yet. Then you do not know what he believes this place represents. Men like him are predictable. They build something small, attach their identity to it, and pretend money cannot reach them. He closed the folder. Eventually, everyone has a price. I rested the old brass key on the table between us. The metal made a quiet sound against the polished wood. You may be right, I said. But based on what I have seen today, Halcyon cannot afford his. Victor's smile faded first. Claire's followed a second later. Neither of them understood what I had said, but both recognized that I had stopped speaking like an employee. Victor leaned forward and placed one hand on the staffing report. Is there something about Northline's finances you believe we missed? He asked. I believe there are several things you missed. Claire looked at me sharply. Mason, this is not the time. You brought the meeting into my workplace. This is not your meeting. I glanced at the old brass key resting between us. That depends on who owns the table. Ben lowered his eyes, hiding the beginning of a smile. Victor did not find it amusing. He gathered the acquisition papers and stood. We have seen enough for today. Claire, finalize the operational review. I want the formal proposal ready for the board by Friday. He turned toward me. Tell the owner that delaying access will affect our valuation. I will make sure he hears every word. Victor left the conference room without offering his hand. The rest of Halcyon's team followed, carrying folders filled with estimates about machines they had not understood and people they had not bothered to meet. Claire remained behind. Through the window, I watched her colleagues cross the production floor toward reception. She waited until the door closed before facing me. What was that? She asked. An inspection. Do not do that. Do what? Answer me as if I am one of your employees. Her voice remained quiet, but the control had begun to crack around the edges. You embarrassed me in front of Victor. I looked toward the workshop. Maria was speaking with a machinist near the inspection station. Ben had returned to the test logs. Everyone continued working because machines did not pause for wounded pride. You stood beside him while he discussed removing 30 people. I said, that is not my decision. You prepared the recommendation. I prepared an analysis. Those people heard the analysis. Claire closed her folder. This is exactly why you have never grown beyond this place. You make every business decision personal. And Halcyon makes every personal consequence sound like a business decision. She stared at me for several seconds. How do you know so much about this acquisition? Maybe I listen when you speak. You knew the access agreement. You challenged the valuation. You spoke about the owner as if you knew him. I picked up the brass key and slipped it into my pocket. You should ask better questions at the board meeting. Her face changed. Not recognition. Not yet. Just unease. What does that mean? It means Victor has spent too much time studying the building and not enough time studying the company. Claire stepped closer. Mason, whatever point you were trying to make, stop. This deal could change my career. I know. Then do not interfere with it. She walked out before I could answer. I watched her cross the workshop in her gray suit, moving past people whose names she had never learned. At the front door, she paused beside my father's sign, looked back once, and left. That afternoon, I met our attorney in the restricted conference room behind the steel door. Ben joined us, along with Olivia Grant, through a secure video call. I had contacted her privately after Halcyon requested the ownership review. As chairwoman, she had the authority to examine conflicts that Victor preferred to keep outside the board record. Their proposal will be $600 million, Olivia said. Victor is presenting it as a complete acquisition. Patents, software, equipment, property, and full operational control. He cannot buy all of that from Northline. My attorney replied. The land belongs to the Reed Family Trust. The building and production equipment belong to Reed Precision Works. Northline owns the intellectual property. Mr. Reed controls all three. Olivia removed her glasses. Does Claire know? No, I said. And Victor? He knows the ownership is layered. He does not know the same person controls every layer. Olivia studied me through the screen. Why allow the proposal to continue? I thought about Claire's email, Victor's staffing plan, and the workers who had heard their futures reduced to a line on a spreadsheet. Because I want the full board to understand what Halcyon is trying to buy and what Victor intends to destroy after he gets it. My attorney slid a black folder toward me. Inside were the ownership records, patent certificates, independent valuation, and Halcyon's internal communications. One document showed that the company's turbine division faced more than $2 billion in penalties if it missed its next delivery schedule. Northline was not an opportunity. It was their only practical solution. There is one more thing, Olivia said. Victor will try to keep the founder out of the room until after the board approves the price. I closed the folder, then insist on meeting him. For days later, Claire stood before Halcyon's board and asked them to authorize the offer. Olivia listened until the final slide, placed both hands on the table, and said, I want the founder in this room before we vote. Outside the glass doors, I stood with my father's key in one hand and the black folder in the other. The general counsel opened the door. Claire looked up. This time, I did not enter as the man she had apologized for. I entered as the man everyone had been waiting to meet.